Okay, everyone, welcome to lesson 3 of the world of Kabbalah. We took a short break, and now we're resuming on a special night. Tonight is it's spiritually significant because there's a Hasidic festival. It's a festival called the 10th of Kislev, and it celebrates a certain individual named Dov Ber, the Mittler Rebbe, and Reb Dov Ber. His birthday was this morning, and his passing also was observed this morning, and his liberation from prison is observed tonight. So it's called the festival of the 9th and 10th of Kislev. And what was remarkable of this man is his ability to take deep mystical concepts and make them accessible. He was the first Kabbalah teacher to make Hasidism extremely accessible. He has numerous of writing. He wrote volumes and volumes, and he spent hours of teaching. He has a son, and that son, people called him the Stender. The Stender is like the lantern, the podium, the lectern. And why did he get that name? So he was saying, "Oh, my father used to lean on me when he used to deliver his talks." They said, "That's why people gave you the nickname." He said, "Well, one time my father spoke for 18 hours straight teaching Hasidism, and so I was in that position for 18 hours." So it celebrates this magical accessibility. And there were deep opponents to him at the time that said, even amongst the Hasidic rabbis, said, you're exposing it too broadly. There's great risk of people thinking they understand it all and misapplying it. But he felt that it was important to make these teachings accessible in this time. So that's one thing I wanted to mention for tonight. The next thing I wanted to mention is that when we study Torah, we should always have in mind the safety and security of our brothers and sisters in Israel. It really helps. And in tonight's lesson, we'll get a little bit taste of why that may help. Also, I want to mention Gail's father, Yehuda Lev Ben Mordechai, who passed away yesterday, right? Yesterday. And the funeral will happen soon. So we wish a prayer, Baruch Dayan Emes. That's a blessing we all say. Blessed is the true judge. And so the Torah learning should be in his honor. So let us begin with some. This lesson is about the infinite light. So let's try to make things a little lighter with some jokes. So how do angels greet each other? They say, "Hello there." Hello. Okay. And why don't angels go to college? Because they already have a higher degree, you know. So this lesson is going to touch on angels, but it's also going to give us the secrets to successful partnerships and relationships and marriages. And the secret is in this lesson in Kabbalah. So we'll start off by reviewing where we come from in lesson 1 and lesson 2, because as we're exploring, what's unique about this course is we're trying to give the map of Kabbalah. We're exploring the map of Kabbalah. What that means is you might hear all these Kabbalistic concepts through your study in Torah, and you might not see the big picture that they play. But Kabbalah is coming to answer a question. How do we get from an infinite God to a human that has a relationship with God? Humans are finite. God is infinite. How can there be a bridge? And so we're walking up the chain. We started with lesson 1, exploring how a Kabbalist sees the world. There are many dimensions to reality. We can experience reality on different dimensions. The lowest dimension we can experience reality on is I exist. Deeper reality is I exist, but there's meaning in my existence, or there's meaning in the world. A level deeper than that is that there's something beyond me. There's something greater than my existence. A deeper reality I can become aware of is that actually my significant, my ego is really very dependent and totally subsumed in a higher consciousness of divine reality. So we explained is all these realities, they have the premises of the self. There's myself, different levels of the self being humble before a higher state of reality, a higher consciousness. And so human beings have the ability, the gift to jump between those different levels of consciousness. We can be on the lowest level of consciousness, thinking we're the center of the universe, but we could raise our level of a consciousness and awareness through prayer, through teachings, through being around other people that see things that way. And the reality is, different people start off, their baseline is at different levels. Some people's baseline are lower than other people. So some people, they see a puzzle, they're always thinking, they see reality through the lens of, what should I do about it? Other people see it through a different lens. How do I feel about it? Other people see it through a higher lens. What do I think about it? Right? How do I analyze this? And you could always go through higher and deeper rungs. Then we explained that there's a higher, all these realities, the premise is I exist and maybe God exists, or certainly God exists. But there's I as a central component here. But these realities are actually born to mirror a higher reality. And that is God as he reveals himself through a specific prism, through a specific mode. So when we say God is great, God is amazing, God is knowledgeable, in a way, those are insults to God. Because God is infinite. And when you call God strong, it's like, okay, strong is that you're limiting God. You're making God strong or you're making God wise. But God is really infinite. So we explain that God's true self is infinite, but he expresses himself in finite ways in order that we can relate to him. So he expresses himself. He chose to express himself through 10 sefirot. And we explained that those 10 sefirot are like the three primary colors on the color wheel, that through those three primary colors, you could create infinite colors. All of music is created just with 7 notes. So these 10 sefirot, God creates all the diversity that we have in this world. And so our world is really a mirror of the 10 sefirot. We have 10 sefirot, the world has 10 sefirot. They're mirroring God's 10 supernal sefirot. God's 10 sefirot are not his essence. They're not God as he truly is, but it's God as he chooses to express himself to make himself more accessible to us. So when we say God created us in his image, and in another verse in the Torah, we say God has no image, which one is true? Does God have no image? Or did God create us in his image? So clearly he has an image. The answer is God's essence is beyond any image. And if you say God is defined by the image, you are limiting God. But God chose to show up in a specific way. And that's the 10 sefirot, the 10 channels, 10 pathways. And we spent time learning a little bit about the 10 sefirot. And then we learned how we mirror that within ourselves. When we learned about, uniquely, we learned about 2 poles. We learn about the right pole of the 10 sefirot on the map and the left pole. The right pole is primarily represented through chesed, kindness, and the left pole is represented through gvura, discipline. And we explained you need both. Chesed is more concerned with the person giving the kindness. In other words, it starts off with me, I want to be generous. Discipline is more thinking about the recipient. What does the recipient deserve? So both are necessary. You need you have one parent is always nice, and then the child doesn't learn anything because there's no feedback. He just, whatever the child does, he always receives what he wants, right? Discipline also could squash the child because there's always tough love. And to explain how you need the harmony of both, that's represented by Tiferet. Everyone remember these teachings? It's a lot. But we're going to move up the rank, okay? And again, stop me if you have any questions. And we'll start off by looking at a text from the Bible which describes Isaiah's vision. Kabbalistic teachings are primarily based on three sections of the Torah, four sections of the Torah. Number one is the Genesis story. The words of the Genesis story is a one major foundation of Kabbalistic teaching. The Sinai experience, the descriptions of Sinai and the Ten Commandments. The prophecy of Ezekiel, the visions of Ezekiel, and the visions of Isaiah. These visions weren't physical visions, just like the Sinai experience. It gives imagery to the experience, but there was no we didn't see physical things. We saw spiritual realities, and we tried to explain them in physical terms. So Kabbalah spends a lot of time at looking at the imagery described in Isaiah and Ezekiel by Mount Sinai, or as described in Genesis, and then tries to unpack it using other imagery. But we have to then try to unpack that imagery to see if we could get a clear picture and taste. Okay, so let's start off by looking at a part of Isaiah's vision in text 1. We're on page 74. Madeline will read for us.
Reaching for infinity?
On the bottom.
Isaiah's vision. Seraphim stood above to serve him, six wings to each one. And one called to the other and exclaimed, Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The entire earth is full of his glory.
Okay. Isaiah is describing angels. Angels with 6 wings. Six-winged angels, they're called seraphim. Seraphim means burning up. Fiery ones. Angels of fire, 6 wings, and one called to the other, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzevaot, Meloch ha'aretz kevodo. Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The entire earth is full of his glory. Now, if you're in synagogue every day or on Shabbat, these words are familiar to you. We quote this vision on Shabbat. So what exactly is he referring to? What does he mean when he says seraphim, these angels, and they're calling 6 wings, and they're calling out to each other, holy, holy, holy? What is the meaning of this? And through studying this next section, we're going to get a great picture. So we're going to put this up behind, and we're going to learn a new concept. The new concept is, till now we explained that there's God's essence, which is infinite, but then there's God as he expresses himself to us, which is finite, in a finite way, which is called the 10 sefirot, or the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation. But now we're going to learn a new concept. And the new concept is, just like the 10 sefirot is a mask that God puts on, it's not his true essence. God has another mask. And the mask is called the mask of infinity. So God has 2 masks. The mask of finiteness, or of presence, of coming close to us. And he also has the mask of infinity. They're both not his essence. God's essence is undefinable. So even when we say the infinite one, we might not be referring to God's essence. We might be referring to the way God shows up to us in our life in an infinite way. Okay? It's a new piece of the puzzle, right? Until now, we thought God's infinity must be describing God's essence. No. God's infinity is also not God's default. It's a way God chooses to show up. So God could show up to us in two ways, in a finite way, in a limited way, and that makes it very accessible to us. And then God can also show up in an infinite way. And that infinite way is called the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. And we're going to explain why we call it light. There's something powerful about this light. So it's infinite light, God's infinite self-projection that is intimately connected with God's essence and that transcends definition, limitation, and specific attributes. So what's unique about this level, so to speak, of this idea, the infinite light, is when you look at it, what do you see? Or what does it look like you're seeing? It looks like you're seeing God's essence, because that's what it's trying to show you. It's the light of God's essence. So what it shows you is exactly what the essence of God looks like, but it's not the essence of God himself. It just looks like that because that's what it's trying to show you. Like, so if you have a window, the best window is a window that you cannot see. If it's dirty, if it has fingerprints on it, all of a sudden, it's not doing a good job of being a window. That's the same thing. When you look at the Or Ein Sof, when you look at the infinite light, you shouldn't be noticing that there's infinite light. What should you be noticing? What it's trying to show you, God's essence. But it's not God's essence itself, right? So God has two ways to show up. He can show up through revealing his infinite light, or he can show up by revealing his finite self to you. And God contains both because God is beyond infinity and is beyond finiteness. So he can show up in both ways. And that is remarkably, that's what we're describing on the map. If you can pull out your map, and you'll see the yellow, what's shown in the yellow. See in the yellow, or keter, okay? That is, whatever's in the yellow represents infinite light or infinity. So now we have the three building blocks, the three-step process, how we get from infinite God to finite worlds. Infinity is an English word. Ein Sof, no end. Ein Sof means no end. And why are we calling it Ein Sof, no end? Why don't we say no beginning? If it's infinity, it should have no beginning or end, right? But again, we're talking about the Or, the light of Ein Sof. The light is revealing God. God is the beginning. The essence of God is the beginning. It's showing you that this light is infinite in the sense that it has no end. But in a way, it has a beginning. What's its beginning? What it's trying to show you? It's trying to show you the essence of God. So that's why this light is called the Or Ein Sof, the light that has no end, the infinite light. Okay, so if we look to the colors all the ways to the left of the map, we'll see at the bottom is reality that feels independent. The green is reality that realizes it's God. It's only God exists, but it's finite. Because it's finite, we don't call it God, we call it godly or godliness, right? A godliness. Whenever God is showing up in a specific way, we call it godliness. It's not God's essence. And in a way, in the infinite as well, the infinite light is also godly. It's not God's essence. It's godly, but it's what you're seeing is God's essence, so it looks like God, but it's God's. That's because it's doing a good job. That's because it's so affected in revealing God's essence than God's infinity that it looks godlike, but it's really considered godly. So whenever we're talking about God expressing himself, that's what we call godly, because the essence doesn't express itself. Whenever God is expressing himself, he's either expressing himself in a defined way, the 10 sefirot, or an infinite way, the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. And these are two modalities how God reveals himself to us. Usually he reveals himself to us in the 10 sefirot. And these two realities, so let's spend a moment to learn more about this Or Ein Sof, this infinite light. There is no light without an illuminator. This light is a window. It's showing you God's essence. If God's essence would disappear, would we have the light? No. It doesn't exist independent of God. It's one with God, but its whole purpose is for revelation. God's essence is not for revelation. If God decided, I don't want to shine today, I don't want to reveal. If God wanted, God could. In other words, God is not forced to show up. But when God chooses to show up in his fullest way, in his infinite way, that revelation is called the light of Ein Sof, the infinite light, the Or Ein Sof.
So what happened in Israel was God present?
It's a good question. The short answer is absolutely. Now, how we understand that? God, in other words, absolutely. We'll get back to that question in a moment after we have some language to discuss it. Okay? So this light is inseparable from its source. Okay? So if you just in the room, we're in the room, it's full of light. You turn off the light switch, right? You cannot capture the light in a bottle. You can't capture the light in the bottle. You turn off the light is gone. Now, you might say scientifically it's not true. Light could travel millions of years and the star already disappeared. And so the source of the light isn't there. But even scientifically, if you from the point of view of light itself, time didn't disappear. There's no time between when it left the source and when it came. From the point of view of light itself traveling, it's here, it's timeless from when the star existed. But at least in human terms, we're using the term light to express this concept that the light is here when the luminary is here. So when we see God's infinite light, that means God is here. But not always are we aware of God's transcendent self. When this light is turned on, when the Or Ein Sof is turned on, we all of a sudden become aware of God's essence that's present here. Okay? So we are here. We're in this physical reality. If God ever shows us his infinite self, that's called an expression of God's infinite light. But is that something new? It's not something new. God's essence is here. We just aren't always aware of it. It's the infinite light that makes us aware of God's essence. So an example of that would be, let's say, a miracle. When we see a miracle, we're getting a taste of God's infinite light. We're seeing some force that lives beyond nature, beyond the system. Because the 10 sefirot represent the system. God creates a system, a framework that he lives in, a game of rules that he plays by, and then he creates that system within us so we can have a game. And that's called a system of nature. And so there's a system, but God sometimes breaks the system, and that's God showing up to us in a way of miracles. This explains some other Kabbalistic terminology that you might find throughout the Zohar and Kabbalistic teachings. Let's take a look at text 2 and text 3. So let's just jump straight to text 3. Text 3 from the Zohar. The Zohar says, he encompasses all worlds, and he fills all worlds. They would say, okay, nice. God is describing two things. But actually, the later commentaries explain that this represents God showing up in two modalities. A light that's Sovev Kol Almin, a light that encompasses the entire world. That's God's infinite light. And then there's the way he fills all worlds. That's God's finite light. Okay? So God has two caps that he wears. Sometimes he wears the finite cap. Sometimes he puts on the infinite cap. These are two costumes that he shows up to us in our life. One is called Sobev Kolalmin, encompasses all worlds. This is God as he transcends the emanation of sefirot and the creation of the lower realities of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. And then there's Memali Kolalmin. This refers to God as he fills all worlds. God as he emanates the sefirot and actively creates Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. So we have these two forms of God showing up in our life. Now, if I'm putting you to sleep, don't worry, because we're soon going to make this all practical. But it's just important I'm just setting up this idea that we have in our map. So we have Memali Kolalmin, which is noticing the beauty of, okay. Let's skip this chart. We'll come back to it in a moment. Okay, so now we get back to the angels. Remember we said the angels are saying, holy, 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 and this is causing them to burn up. What's happening is that these angels are creations. Angels are creations. They're creations like the world is a creation. These angels are creations, but they have divine awareness. So imagine a celebrity. Imagine you read a teaching. Imagine you know an actor. An actor did a great job portraying Winston Churchill. And you're so amazed at his acting, you're like, I would love to meet that actor. He did a phenomenal job. And then you show up to the meal, and then you realize that he's not acting like Winston Churchill. You say, what's going on? Where's the British accent? Where's all the clever remarks? All of a sudden, there's a whole different side of him. You say, yeah, well, he was just acting. The same thing is, we can relate to God as the creator of the universe. But is that who God's essence is? God is a creator of an awesome universe, but he's also so much more. He transcends the universe. He transcends time and space. And so, if you remember 2 weeks ago, we gave a metaphor. We said that there was a brilliant teacher, Einstein. Yeah, Einstein is trying to teach his students a brilliant idea. What's going on in his mind? He has a vast genius in his mind. He's trying to express it to 12th graders. So what does he do? He thinks very deeply of how to distill one of his core teachings into a way that's very accessible and relatable to the students. He makes the teaching relatable, but the smart student says, wow, that's a brilliant idea. Let me build on that. Let me learn more about these teachings. But he doesn't stop there. He also starts to realize that Einstein is not just a brilliant person. There's also so much more to him. And so that's a way that we can relate to this idea that on one hand, God shows up to us in a finite way. That makes God accessible to us. But God is so much more than that. And that's something that we find throughout the prayers. The beginning of the prayers, most of the Psalms express how God takes care of us, how God loves us, how God has created this vast world and this vast universe. These are ways to develop feelings and emotions to God, because we feel God takes care of us and God loves us. But then we build our way up and we remember that it's true that God loves us and takes care of us and he's patient and he's kind and he's close and he thinks about our every need. But is that it that God is? Is that all that God is about? But God is so much more than that. And so we introduce these angels. The angels are aware of God. They are aware of God's finiteness, of his 10 sefirot, and that makes them burning with passion. But then they say to each other that even though we're aware of God in all his glory, this is all God as he's expressing it, is showing up to us in a finite way. Truly, God is holy, holy, holy. 3 levels of being removed from even what we think is great about God. So we carry a Jew has 2 responsibilities. One responsibility is to feel close to God and to do everything he can to feel attached and to appreciate the way that God shows up to him in his life. But then at the same time, he has to remember that God is not defined by that. God is way beyond that. And that, now that we have this out of the way, now we have good grounds to take off our Kabbalistic hat and actually try to make these teachings more accessible. So, you have an awareness. When you see God as a creator, it's a bridge to appreciate God on his own terms, God in his essence. So there's two steps. We shouldn't start by saying, God, you're infinite, because that's really a shortcut. You know what happens when we say God is infinite? We really are kind of saying God has nothing to do with me. Because God is transcendent, God is infinite. And in fact, many of the pagans believed in God, but they said, God is infinite, so he has nothing to do with us. He doesn't care of what happens to us. So we have to rely on all these intermediaries, all these pagan gods, now to make, now that's something that's more accessible. So really, we start off, God is close to us. God cares about us. God loves us. God invests himself in every part of the universe. But that's not all who God is. God is really holy, 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 fully transcendent from this all. So there was once a dad who was teaching his son, his daughter. His daughter was going off to college. And the dad said, daughter, I want you to remember something very important. There'll be guys that will try to woo you and impress you. But you have to think big picture. Is this the person that you'd like to go through a divorce with? Right? What is this reality? We know that relationships and marriages are very difficult, very hard. What is the secret to successful marriage and successful relationships that are very difficult? You know, there was a couple celebrating their jubilee, their 50th wedding anniversary. What do you call it? The diamond, the silver? I don't know, whatever. The special anniversary. And so someone says, Ivan, what's the secret? How do you stay married so long? Says, well, you know, there's no I in marriage. You have to give of yourself fully. He says, Betty, what's the secret of a marriage? So I don't correct his spelling. You know, I don't correct his spelling. So we have relationships and marriages, and we're trying to figure out how do we make it work. So that's what we're going to spend the next few minutes, the secrets. So let's look at a famous prayer and a famous song, and maybe we could sing it together for safety and security of the Jewish people in Israel. Let's go to text 6 and let's sing it together. Oh, says shalom bimrama. Oh, yeah, says shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'imru, v'imru, amen. Hey, Yasa Shalom, Yasa Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, v'yal kol Yisrael. Hey, Yasa Shalom, Yasa Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, v'yal kol Yisrael. Okay, we'll stop here, but let's take a look. We're on page 82, and let's take a look at this phrase, and we'll notice something that maybe you've never asked. But now we're going to have the question and the answer. So let's take a look at text 6, the translation. May he who makes peace in his heavens make peace for us and all of Israel. And let us say, Amen. So may he who makes peace in his heavens. Who is fighting in heaven? Who's fighting in heaven that God is making peace between them? The angels what are they fighting? They're jealous? The angels are jealous? Anyone have an answer?
You all are
We all are what?
fighting to make peace.
Yeah, but what about in heavens? We're saying he who makes peace in heaven. Who's fighting in heaven? In other words, we're saying the same God who makes peace in heaven should also make peace in our world.
Yeah, no one's fighting. That's how he makes peace in heaven.
Right. Well, who would be fighting? I guess who would be fighting? Like, what?
There's no fighting, but it could be that they're I don't want to use the word jealous, but they wish that they had the opportunity to be challenged.
Okay. So let's remember the sefirot, right? Here we have, he is referring to God. But why is there, he's making peace between what factions in heaven? Which warring factions is God making peace between? So then what do you call it? It's not peace. There's no two parties to make peace between. They're just as God. Sure.
Bringing peace. Just that we aren't receiving it.
Okay, but we're asking about God. We say God makes peace in heaven. You cannot bring peace between if everyone is on the same page. If everyone's on the same page, you don't need to bring peace. So let's take a look at the sefirot. This is a map of the 10 sefirot. You also have it on your, this is a slide. You also have it on your map. We have 10 sefirot. So let's take a look at chesed and gevura. So chesed is loving kindness, generosity. And gevura is discipline. Remember, these are expressions of godliness, right? So these can be good qualities. And these are godly, so they're infinite. In other words, chesed, in the world of loving kindness, it's infinite loving kindness. It's infinite loving kindness. In the world of gevura, of discipline, it's infinite restraint and discipline. And so within their own bubble, they see, from their perspective, I am expressing the trueness of God. And so, chesed and gvura are the warring factions. Chesed, in the world of kindness, it sees that God is so generous and so kind. And this is the most important ideal in the whole of reality, is God's generosity. From gvura's point of view, you call that a special? Discipline and self-restraint is the most important quality in the universe. And so sometimes you'll have a meeting between the creative director of a company and the finance team, and they're speaking a different language. The creative director is saying, we want, the most important thing is the aesthetics, the design, the taste, the beauty. That's the most important. And the financial team is like, what are you talking about? The most important thing is that we balance our books. That's the most important thing. And so how do you get these two teams to cooperate? How do you get them to work together? The people that are experts in design, they don't have an appreciation for budgets because that's not their core competency. Their core competency is creativity and beauty. So they're putting in all their efforts to make beauty, to make sure customers are love the product. They love the company. That's the whole job of the creative market. And now you hear these people yapping, but we can't do that because of numbers, because of money, they're like, what? The whole job is to make beauty, to make products that people love. They said, sorry, we cannot use that material. We have to use a cheaper material. The creative department says, no, but what are you talking about? People won't love it as much. So how do you make peace between these factions? The answer is you have to bring in a more powerful force that exists beyond these two forces. And then when they're paying attention to that bigger force, they can put aside their differences and use their talents to work together. In the case of a company, what would be the higher mission? The success of the company, right? The success of the mission. So let's say the mission of the company is to bring products to market that people will love. Okay, that's the mission of the company. The creative department knows that they have to make sure it's a product that people love. But they know that it can't be brought to market if you don't keep in the budget. So now we'll turn to the budgeting department to deal with that. So they know that they cannot achieve the bigger mission if they don't work together. So when the two departments know the bigger picture, they're able to work together and to compromise. And that's what happens in the 10 sefirot. The 10 sefirot by default, as they exist, cannot tolerate each other. They are enemies with each other. They think that the other force is the destructive, the denial of Hashem. But when they're introduced to a higher light, to God's infinite light, when God's infinite light is present, then they put aside their differences and said, actually, we're here for a greater purpose. We're here to reveal God, and God expresses himself in two pathways, in kindness and restraint, in generosity and in judgment. They're both essential. Okay, so under this bigger picture, they're able to come together. So that explains in the sphere map, there's 22 ways, 22 different connections, right? In other words, this is how really the divine light gets filtered through these 10 sefirot. In other words, the 10 sefirot, they don't work distinct from each other. They actually bounce off each other. They consult with each other. Kindness consults with discipline, and discipline consults with kindness, and wisdom consults with the analytical mind, and the analytical mind with the inquisitive mind. They're consulting with each other. Why? Because they know that they're part of a higher purpose, and there's a higher mission here. And that's when we have the presence of Keter. Keter means crown. And this is a representation of God's infinite light. When God's infinite light is, when the lower sefirot, when the 10 sefirot are aware of God's infinite light, it helps them put things in perspective. Helps them say, although I believe I am the true expression of God, but I'm aware that actually God is infinite. So now I could put aside my agenda and cooperate with a different sefira, a different attribute that also feels that it's the essence of God's light. And this process of the sefirot working together and collaborating together is the word hiskalalut. Hiskalalut means incorporation. When the different sefirot, the intermingling and harmonization of the godly sefirot. This hitkalalut, this incorporation, we should not take for granted. If it wasn't for Keter, if it wasn't for that crown that sits above, if it wasn't for that awareness of the infinite light, the sefirot would not be working together. They'd see themselves as, I am the whole purpose of creation, I am the true expression of the divine, and anyone who says different is heresy. But because of Keter, because of this higher crown, of this awareness of God's glory, of God's infinity, that helps them do this hiskalalut, this working together. That's the yellow circle on top called Keter. Well, it's not, it's that word hitkalalut, it's not on the map, it's the lines between. It's the lines between the sefirot. It's expressing the channels, the pathways, the ways that the sefirot work together.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, do these sefirot connect with body parts?
Yeah, there are places where it describes the connection to body parts.
Yes.
For example, Chesed and Gevura. Chesed corresponds to the right arm, and Gevura corresponds to the left arm.
So is Keter responding to the head, to the brain?
No, it's corresponding to a crown that might sit above the brain.
So it's above the brain. Okay, that's
above the brain. It's not within the body. It's a force that's beyond the body. It's some higher reality. In other words, here when we're saying the crown, we're not referring just to a type of hat wear. We're referring to this royalty, this overriding power,
right,
that elevates all the 10 sefirot, that shows you're part of some broader mission. You're part of some bigger process than just yourselves. So that's what the Keter represents, the crown. So this is the parable of the ministers. The
But can I
parable
ask
of the
you,
ministers.
is this
Go
why,
ahead.
I'm sorry, is this why we don't fold our fingers together? Is that like mixing the
There are
tools?
many Kabbalists will not cross their hands. This is what Joel's referring to. They won't sit like this. Let me put on the screen. They won't put their hands like this. And the reason is not because seemingly you want his scholarhood, you want cooperation. So what's wrong? But the truth is, in our reality, in our exile reality, we want more kindness than discipline. That's what we want right now. So therefore, in this current state, we don't want to mix the right arm, which is chesed, with gevura. We'd rather put the right hand in front of gevura. So that's how a Kabbalist might say it. And that's why a Kabbalist, for the same reason, will put on his right shoe before his left shoe. Did you know that? Kabbalists put on their right shoe first. When they're sticking their arm into their clothing, they always do everything with the right first.
But
You're
that's
taking
in,
it.
yeah. I mean,
Go
that's
ahead.
that's in Code of Jewish Law, how to get
But it's
dressed.
but it's from Kabbalistic sources.
Right.
It comes from the Kabbalistic tradition, those parts of the Code of Jewish Law. So that's correct. So everything in general, most things that we do with our right hand first, except when it comes to tying. When we tying things, we do left first. So a Kabbalist will put his right shoe on, then his left shoe on, then tie his left shoe, and tie his right shoe. And because they're trying to model certain realities that they're trying to. So that's the same in when you think of kosher. One of the mitzvahs of kosher is not to mix milk and meat. Now, what's the reason? Well, here's how a Kabbalist sees it. Milk, which represents nourishment and whiteness, is connected to chesed, to kindness. And meat, which is red and tough, represents gevura, strength and discipline. And this is a mitzvah of that idea that certain times we shouldn't put them together. It's better when they're working side by side than losing their identities and mixing together. Now, there are some situations where we want things to come together. So don't use this like you really have to be a Kabbalist to understand when it's right and when it's wrong. There's also a mitzvah in the Torah not to mix clothing, not to wear clothing that's a mix of wool and linen. It's the same idea. Wool is connected to kindness, and linen is connected to harshness. And you're allowed to wear linen. You're allowed to wear wool. But you're not allowed to wear a garment that's made up of both together. Okay. That's an interesting point you brought up, Joe. Very good with the fingers. Okay. So what's the metaphor? The parable of the ministers. Yeah.
He's family,
Mhm.
because you introduced this by saying that, there was two ways to parent. Is that somehow trying to incorporate us recognizing there are two ways or three ways or four ways? That if you mix it, you may not see everything. So you try to understand things individually and somehow pull it together.
Yes, the answer is yes, but we're gonna elaborate on that in a moment. We're gonna elaborate on that in a moment. So here's the parable of the ministers. Let me explain this parable of the ministers, and then let's explain. So the parable of the ministers is a teaching from text 7 from Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and he writes the synthesis of the 10 sefirot, especially those that are opposites, such as chesed and gevura, kindness and restraint, is made possible through the agency of supernal light that transcends the characteristics of the sefirot. Upon sensing this supernal light, the sefirot experience bittul. They relinquish their configuration and synthesize with each other. Okay, let's try to make this more digestible. Consider the example of two government ministers who hopelessly oppose each other. When they appear together before the king, they remain who they are with their preferences, but find themselves working with opposing viewpoints to reach a required consensus. This is a consequence of their state of bittul, that results from the overwhelming trepidation and awe of the king's majesty, whose rank by far transcends their own. Similarly, the opposite forces of Chesed and Gevura in Atzilut can synthesize due to the illumination of God's infinite light, the Or Ein Sof. So this is something at the end of the class, we're going to spend some time to become aware of our own infinite light within us and how we can use that to get us to work and to function. Because sometimes we have blockages within us and we want to know, how do we overcome those blockages? I know that there's something I want to do, but I feel blocked. I can't do it. If only I could dig deep within to my infinite light and somehow bring the king to the room. Bring the king to the room. The king is usually inaccessible. But if the king were here, all of a sudden the opposing factions would start to work together. And that's something we're going to try to do at the end of the class. We're going to do an exercise to try to practice this strategy. Okay. Barbara, what was it?
How do you bring all that together, everybody to a resolution?
So we're going to exercise that within ourselves. Not always is it so easy for us to do with other parties if we're not the bigger person. In other words, we might have our own point of view, and they have their own point of view. If the two of us surrender to a higher value or some higher party, then there could be cooperation. But if only I surrender to the higher value and the other person doesn't, then not necessarily can it work. And especially doesn't work if I think that what I believe in is the higher value and the other person thinks what he believes in is the higher value, then it certainly won't lead to cooperation.
Should God continue to mediate and bring people to a certain point?
Yeah.
Because if you get sticking in your own place.
Oh, you can't give up. You can't give up. But we'll at the end of the lesson. Okay. So God's infinity is expressed through the crown. The Keter represents God's Or Ein Sof, God's infinite light showing up. And this results in the middle column. Generally, in the map, you see the middle column. These sefirot are harmony sefirot. The sefirot in the middle column are the synthesis between so you have to look at your map to see this. The synthesis between in the middle column sefirot are the synthesis between the right and the left column. And because they have a greater awareness of the Keter, of the crown, of the Or Ein Sof, of God's infinite light. So because they have the greater awareness, so they're able to embody both realities at the same time, which we might see as impossible. How could you be both? But as the rabbi told the two people arguing in front of him, one person presented his case, and the rabbi said, "You're right." And then the other person presented his side of the story. The rabbi's like, "You're right." And then the Rebbitzin chimes in from the kitchen. How could they both be right? You're right. Right? In other words, sometimes when we're looking at the big picture, even opposites could both be true at the same time. And only when you surrender to that infinite light can you handle opposites. When you're not infused with that higher consciousness, with that infinite consciousness, then your mind becomes very small and narrow. And when it becomes narrow, then there's no way to overcome the blockages. There's a block and you're stuck. That's why when every day we were called the Exodus of Egypt. It's a mitzvah every day. The Torah says every day you should recall the Exodus of Egypt. Every day. Why should I recall it? But the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim comes from the word narrow. It's that narrow-mindedness, that space that we live in that's very small and narrow. And it's like only my way, the way I see things is the only way reality can be. And so God asks of us, go out of your narrowness. Start to see things from a higher consciousness, from a higher picture where you can tolerate and carry within you what previously seemed impossible. What's previously warring factions now become possible. So when we're saying, Osa Shalom ben Roma, God, you bring peace between the higher factions, that's referring to the sefirot that are at war with each other, but because they're aware of Keter, of the crown, of God's majesty, of God's infinite light, they start working together. And so we ask God to bring that into our own life. Which, in other words, we're asking God to bring infinite light, show up in our world. And what's going to happen when God reveals himself in our reality? What happens is, all of a sudden, all these warring factions actually see we're all part of the same team. We're all working towards a higher mission. We're all under God's umbrella. So now you understand why learning Torah in Woodbury or in Plainview or in New Jersey affects the safety and security of the people in Israel. So what's the connection? It says because when we study Torah, we bring greater divine awareness to ourselves and the world around us. And that leads to greater peace in the whole world. And so this is a very important idea. And if you ever heard of Tikkun Olam, everyone heard of that expression, Tikkun Olam? Well, next week we're going to learn more about it, but the full expression is actually Letaken Olam b'malchut Shaddai, to reveal God's kingship, to fix the world by revealing God's kingship. Now, at first glance, you're saying this is some kind of, we're trying to impose a dictatorship of God over the whole world. No, we're actually saying we're repairing the world by doing mitzvahs and doing Torah, which reveals God's infinite light into the world, which will create harmony and peace in the whole world. So that is the Jewish project, is revealing God's infinite light into the world. And that automatically brings peace. Because what happens when I have a heart and I have a heart cell that decides, hey, everyone's saying the brain is so amazing. I want to be a brain cell. Well, you have a big health problem because the heart has to be a heart and the brain has to be a brain. But what happens if the heart says, well, I'm the most important thing that ever existed. So I'm going to keep all the oxygen to myself. Then the brain will die. In other words, when all the organs in the body feel that they're part of one organism, they're part of one identity, then the heart knows it's helping the brain by being the best heart it could be, and the brain knows it's helping the heart by being the best brain it can be, and they're all working together, and they realize it's not a competition. Each has to excel at who they are for the well-being of everyone else. So it's the individuality shows up to its fullest, but for the sake of the greater good as well. So it's a great hiskalulus, this great harmonization that occurs when there's this overwhelming unified sense of identity. And so the individual parts see themselves as part of one organism. And that can happen amongst nations. You could have fighting nations, and then you realize, hey, you should remain the nation you are. We should remain the nation we are, but we should remember that we're serving one greater good, each bringing the gifts and the qualities that we have to bring to the table. So the creative department shows up and the finance department shows up and they see the world through different lenses, but they know they're part of a same greater mission. This is the secret to successful marriages. The successful marriage is not when both parties erase their personality. No. One of you might be a chesed character and one of you might be a gevura. But as long as you see that you're part of a greater picture, you're serving a higher power, a higher cause. You could call it marriage. You could call it God. Whatever that higher system that you're striving towards, then, number one, you could put aside some differences. And a more advanced level is you could embrace your difference. You don't have to compromise on your difference, but you should actually embrace your difference and see how your differences actually contribute to the well-being and the success of the whole. This is actually symbolized in a Jewish wedding. A Jewish wedding, on the one hand, is a physical bond, but in Kabbalah, it's also expressed as a soul bond. It's two halves coming together. With all the marriage jokes that we know, it should seem impossible. And is it impossible? The answer is yes. It really is impossible unless you bring in a higher light. Marriages are impossible. They're ready to break apart at any moment. That's their default state of falling apart unless you bring in the crown, unless you bring in that higher light, that higher consciousness that now embraces the marriage and now brings the two forces together. So how can two souls merge into soulmates? That's an expression by focusing on the higher ideal. What is the higher ideal? Is infinite light, infinite reality, or we can call it life. What's the difference between existence and life? Can you think of the difference? Existence versus life.
Meaning,
That's right.
Living with purpose versus just like living and just not really doing anything meaningful.
The way my teacher in when I was 16, he used to say, "Are you alive because you're alive, or are you alive because you weren't hit by a truck?" Right? That's how he used to express it as. If you're alive because you weren't hit by a truck, okay, you're not really alive. You just exist. You exist. And existence corresponds to everything in the world that exists but is not alive. But then there's life. And sometimes we're so busy trying to prop up our existence and feel secure and feel safe. So we're saying, if only I had more cars, a bigger house, a better looks, better wisdom, anything that we try to acquire to prop up our existence. But what happens when we spend so much time focusing on propping up our existence? The existence becomes big and heavy. And then we need more things to secure that existence. The existence doesn't really stand on its own. It's really propped up, and we have to constantly feed it. And then it gets bigger, and then becomes heavier, and makes us more depressed and more down and more anxious. That is existence, state of existence. And that existence falls apart. It's constantly breaking and falling apart. But what is life? Life is that infinite light, that force that propels us to go higher, to go bigger, to go beyond ourselves, to transcend ourselves. Now, sometimes we have to do juggling because we on the one hand, we have to be ourselves. We also have to transcend ourselves. This is the balancing act of life. You spend too much focus on trying to prop up your existence, then you squash your life. And then you die. You could be alive, but you're dead inside. You have to invest in life. Invest in life. And so that could be true in relationships too. So the process of existence is creation, and then erosion, and then demise. And that's how sometimes how some people describe reality. The law of entropy, the laws of things are breaking apart. That is reality. Things break apart. The things are not meant to hold together. Being together is unnatural. The natural state of reality is falling apart, is breaking apart, erosion and demise. And that's true of existence. Well, let's take a look at life. Life is creation, which leads to marriage, which leads to more creation, which leads to more building, which means to life. So we have the laws of entropy and the laws of biology. The laws of making sure there's no obstacles, making sure we're safe and secure. That's a focus on preserving our existence. But then there's the laws of life, overcoming obstacles, overcoming differences to create something bigger than ourselves. And that's represented in creation. So how do we find peace? Number one, we have to be true to ourselves. We shouldn't erase our differences to have peace. You erase differences, you have nothing left. You have nothing left to bring to the table. Shouldn't your goal to find peace? This is how many people think there'll be peace. The way there'll be peace is by erasing differences. Will that bring peace? Well, it'll bring peace, but it'll bring death. It'll be dead. You won't have life. you'll have peace because it's dead. It's not vibrant. It's not alive. If you want it to be alive, you cannot erase difference. You have to embrace differences, and you have to allow your conscious mind to sense what your soul already senses, which is something beyond the self. And that's why there are many traditions in the Jewish wedding ceremony that represent this. So in Kabbalah, Kabbalistic imagery, the way they represent these two models that we expressed, one what we call Soviet Kalaman, God encompasses all worlds, and Mimalik Kalaman, God fills all worlds. That's God's infinite light and God's finite expression. It's also symbolized by a circle and a line. A circle, there's no beginning and no end. It's just that, it's a circle. A line has a start and a finish. That represents God's finite light. So you have the circle and the line. We'll notice in the wedding ceremony, many things that have to do with this encircling. The circle represents bringing the infinite light into this union. So you have two lights here. You have the male light, you have the female light. They represent lights of lines, of the finite light. Two lines standing together. But how are we going to bring them to work together in harmony? The infinite light. So let's walk through some examples here. Let's work through some examples. Let's skip this for a second. Let's see if we can find. I'm just looking to see. No, it doesn't seem like I have it. So let's look in the. Let's see if we have in our book. Let's see. Oh, here, page 86. Let's look together on page 86. Okay? This is a description of things that are happening on the wedding day. So first, where do the bride and groom stand? They stand under a chuppah. Why do they stand under a chuppah? This idea, this awareness, the two lines standing beneath the circle, between the higher sphere. It's like the sefirot standing underneath Keter. The sefirot are working together, standing underneath the crown of God's glory. What is the bride wearing? She's veiled, right? She's veiled. In other words, you might look at the bride, and what will you see? Beauty. But then we say, let's veil the bride, and don't get distracted by the beauty, because there's so much more within her than just this external beauty. And so that's the outer bride. So again, always the higher light brings deeper awareness. Instead of being superficial, it encourages us to be deep and to be transcendent. Then the bride encircles the groom 7 times, at least in many circles, right? The bride circles the groom 7 times. That corresponds to drawing down 7 levels of the infinite light. Okay? What does the groom put on the bride? A circular ring. Okay? And then what is the traditional wedding dance? It's the hora. It's a circle. It's an infinite dance where you lose. Where's the beginning of the dance? Where's the beginning of the circle? Where's the end? It's everyone celebrating in this circle where there's no beginning and no end. One big merge. And this is the power that we draw down on a wedding day. And that's why under a chuppah, it's a very special time to pray for things and to access, because there's this great divine revelation that is present by a wedding. And so that is the attitude that Jewish people have when they're at a chuppah. On the one hand, it's very joyful. But on the other hand, there's also a certain seriousness to it, because there's joy, but there's also the awareness of this is something grand, something infinite is happening here. Some magic is happening where two opposites are coming together for something greater, for something bigger. And that is, as long as a couple remembers that on the one hand, we bring different things to the table, but we're here for something bigger than ourselves, then they have the blessing of God amongst them. Just to add some extra flavor to this, if you know Hebrew, you can relate to this idea. The way you say man in Hebrew is ish. Ish is 3 Hebrew letters, Aleph, Yud, Shin. The way you say woman in Hebrew is isha, which is 3 Hebrew letters, Aleph, Shin, Hey. If you look at the similar letters between male, man, and woman, it's the letters Aleph and Shin, which spell the words Aish, fire. And so you have 2 fires here. And now it's trouble. It's big trouble. But you have to combine those 2 extra letters. The letter for Ish is Yud. The letter for man is Yud. That extra letter for Isha is Hey. Yud and Hey is Ka, is God's name, right? When you say hallelujah, praise is Yud K, God's name. When you have God in here, now it's a healthy fire. It's a fire of love, of passion, of warmth, and light. But if you take out the Yud and the Hey, if you take out God from the marriage, then what do you have? You just have destruction. So, is marriage a good idea? The answer is, it depends. If, in other words, if you're able to bring this higher force into it, it's the most awesome thing you can have. You're bringing infinity into the world. But if you divorce a marriage from God, then it's just clashing. It's just a bunch of clashing. So if you're trying to if you're trying to have a good existence, don't get married. If you want to have a good existence, don't get married. Marriage is just trouble. But if you want to have a good life, if you want to have life, then get married and bring God into your life. Okay. We can end here, but there's actually many deeper insights that we can learn from this concept. Okay? How do we get in touch with our inner king, with our inner light, our inner infinite light? We explain that the human being can show up in the way he behaves and speaks, but that's not the real him. That's just his garments. That's the garments of the soul. It's not the soul itself. It's the garments of the soul, the way he expresses himself. But you can think things that are not true to you, that are not true. You can think 2 + 2 is 5, and you can say, I love moldy tofu. It doesn't mean that it's right. So that's one gift that we have. Doesn't mean it's true. Right? We can say and even think things that are not true. We could certainly do things that are not true, right? But then we explain that who are we? We are our sefirot. We are our feelings and our intellect, the way we understand things and the way we feel about things. That is who we are. But now we're going to become aware that the truth is that's not the deepest part of ourselves. The deeper part of ourselves is our soul undefined. And that corresponds the same way there's God's infinite light, and then the way God shows up through expression, through the 10 sefirot, so too is in our own life. We have our inner soul that's beyond definition. But then there's the way our soul expresses itself through our intellectual mind and through our emotions. And that we have differences. So let's say, so let me ask you a question. When someone says they want to have a baby, they want to have children, where is that coming from? Is that coming from their intellect or from their essence?
Essence.
So that in a way, I can make rational arguments why I should have a child. I could also make rational arguments why not to have children. It's bad for climate change. It's bad for my existence, right? There's
God. Multiple.
okay, so you have to bring that to bear. Okay. We have to bring that forward. But at least for this thought experience, before we get to what's right or wrong, for this thought experiment, sometimes we want things because it makes sense. Sometimes we want things because it feels good, right? But some things we want, it's innate. So these things that we want because it feels good, those things are called lower ruts. They are called lower ratzon, are lower desires. Then there are higher desires, desires that are innate. Well, how can you distinguish between higher desires and lower desires? How do you distinguish between them? How do you know if this thing is becoming from my essence or it's an external thing? For example, if you love vanilla ice cream, raise your hand. I guess only me? Okay, there's two people. Okay, if you love chocolate ice cream, raise your hand. If you prefer a different dessert to ice cream altogether, raise your hand. Okay, right? Everyone has different tastes. This desire, the fact that you prefer something else to ice cream, is that an innate part of your identity? Is this an expression of your deepest self? What do you think? Is the fact that you love vanilla and you love chocolate and someone else loves something different, is that an expression of your deepest self, of your deepest desire? How do we differentiate? How do we know? Maybe I love vanilla because my soul is attached to vanilla. How do we know? How do we distinguish? The way you distinguish, the key exercise, the key puzzle you have to figure out, and this could get tricky, but the key root is something that always was and always will be. It's a transcendent desire. That means it's a desire that cannot be updated with more information. If it's a thing that could update with more information or more experience, then it doesn't express an innate desire. Let's give an example. If someone in their childhood liked a certain drink, but then they grew up and they can't believe that they liked that drink, is anyone can relate to that? A childhood snack that you loved, but now you wouldn't just go near it, right? So then you know that desire for that treat is not coming from the deepest part of your soul. It's coming from lower desire. It's a lower desire. It's an external desire. Then there are things that are innate desires. Innate desires like life. I want to live. That's an innate desire. I want to have children. That can be an innate desire. Many of these things are innate desires. Now, it's possible that we can lose touch with our innate desires. It is possible. How? If you live in your head, if you're a person that has been so divorced from your innate self because you have been forced to always be rational about things. Let's say that you're someone who's been trained. Every time you say, I really want that, and you always heard, no, you don't. No, you don't. You say, oh, I really like that. Oh, that's not good for you. So if you heard that a lot, what does that force you to start living? It starts forcing you to live in your mind. You become a person always evaluating things through your mind. So you can never hear the voice of what's your innate desire. So if suddenly you start living in your head, so then if in your head you could be divorced from your true self. So on the one hand, so innate desires is a very tricky business because on the one hand, we believe that innate desires are always there. They're always constant. However, it doesn't mean you're always aware of it because you could be living out of touch with yourself. So from the Jewish view, being Jewish is an innate desire. Being Jewish is an innate desire. But you can ask many Jews today, do you want to be Jewish? And they might say, no, actually, it's causing me so much problems. As Tevye famously said, I know we're the chosen, but wouldn't you choose somebody else once in a while? Like, choose somebody else with all the tsaras. But how do I know that when do you realize that it's innate desire? In other words, what's at the end of the day, what's the real test? The one test is what happens under pressure, under tremendous stress. What comes out? Your innate desires will come out. You'll give up all your false desires for your innate desire. So how do I know this? I once met an atheist, and he was don't try this idea at home. Do not try this. But he was arguing me for hours that he doesn't believe in God, and he doesn't believe in mitzvahs, and he doesn't believe in an ethno-state and an ethno people and Jewish people. I said, of course you don't, because you're not really Jewish. He said, how dare you? Of course I'm Jewish. He just spent 3 hours explaining to me why he's not Jewish. And then when I challenged him on his Jewishness, what happened? How dare you? Where did that come from? Because what happened was when I confronted him, he just flipped from his rational brain to his innate desire. Innate desire of a Jew is I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew. I cannot be not a Jew. But sometimes we can live in a state that's out of our innate desires and live in our brain or in our emotions in a reactionary way instead of an innate life way. And that's can explain some of the magic that we're seeing in the land of Israel. Whoever studied the last year from October 6th and earlier, and you looked at the land of Israel, what would you say is going on in this nation? This is a nation divided. This is a nation that is polarized. This is a nation of disintegration. What changed that? What changed that was when the Jewish people were under existential threats. All of a sudden, what happens? The Jewish people are united. Everyone's saying, Yachad, not Seyach. Together, we will win. All of a sudden, the whole country is uniting. The people who were anti-religious are kosherizing the restaurants to be able to provide kosher food for the soldiers. Right? And the Torah students, some of them are joining the army and are joining the military. What happened? 2 days ago, you guys were fighting. Today, you're getting along. But that's this idea. You shine this higher light, and all of a sudden, what seemed as opposing factions could actually work together in harmony for something greater. So we all have this infinite light within us. But sometimes we don't live from that space until we're challenged, until we're crushed. But who wants to be crushed to get into such a state? So is there any way that we can get into such a state that we can manufacture a state of being in the zone? And that is the technique we're going to end off this class. We're going to end off the class with this technique, something we can do to try to, once we're aware of what our innate desires are, but we don't feel it in our lives, how can we bring it to the fore? So we're going to take a look at the 3 higher sefirot, which is the intellectual sefirot, and we're looking on the right side of our map. Our intellectual sefirot of Chachma and Bina and Da'at, creativity, comprehension, and personalization. Okay? So this higher light that we have within us, in Kabbalah, it's often referred to as ratzon, as desire. Okay? It's our innate desires, and it's also the same letters as sinar. It's the path that brings life into our whole being. Okay, so innate desires are beyond intellect, but they also manipulate our intellect. In other words, when we want something very much, we can find any excuse to justify what we really want. When someone innately desires to have children, then you ask me, why do you want children? They might give you a lot of reasons. But the truth is, those are not the real reasons. The real reason is innate. It's who I am. It's life. It's an expression of my soul, expression of life. All these reasons. Oh, the child, I want to experience the challenge of motherhood. I want to kids that will take care of me when I get older. All these things, are distractions. When you think these intellectual reasons are the real reasons, it could actually confuse you. Because what happens when the challenge becomes too great? You're having the child and it's just too exhausting, or a child that, let's say, is, God forbid, not feeling well, and it becomes so challenging. So then you might feel disconnected. Like, this is not what I had in mind. Well, that's because you thought having children is something to do with your mind. But it really wasn't about that. It's really something much deeper. And so when you get in touch with that deeper feeling, you're able to overcome much greater challenges. What happens when your kids are disrespecting you? So if you're not aware of your innate desire for children, what happens is it becomes a whole war. Hey, don't disrespect me. How dare you? I brought you into this world. I take care of you. I do this and that for you. But when we're in touch with our innate self, we're able to live with a higher consciousness, a much greater perspective. Now, everything I'm saying, this is not easy. The work here is tremendous. But we're going to use a strategy that is Kabbalists employ to bring our desire to the forefront. Okay? Another thing about innate desires is that they're constant. They're always there. We're not always aware of them, but they are always there. Okay? And they're infinity-like. They're infinity-like. So this is the higher desires. Higher desires usually lead. There's a desire that drives the logic, but then there's a lower desire. And the lower desire it's the logic that fuels the desire. What happens if we're aware that I know I love life, but I don't feel it right now? I don't feel a love for life right now. Or I know I love my children, but I don't feel like I love my children right now. Or I know Judaism is my essence, but I don't feel very Jewish. Or I don't feel like I want to do this right now. But I know it's my true self. So since your higher desires lead to your intellect, it could also work in reverse. If you use your intellect properly, you can become in touch with your innate desires. So let's do this exercise. Okay, let's just go through. Ratzon HaNefesh, the soul's desire. It's a desire flowing from the soul's innate nature, but then there's another kind of desire, a desire generated by contemplation. And both of these are true. They're both true. There's different ways. One is top down and one is bottom up. So let's say, what happens if you have a failure you experience a failure in your life? You experience something truly fail. Let's change this up. A friend comes to you. He said, it was terrible. It was a disaster. How do you calm this person down? How do you reassure them? So one option is you tell them you're still worthy. The failure doesn't define. That's one option. Another option is say, try something else. Do something different. Maybe that wasn't suited for you. Maybe you were the wrong person. But if you know that this project that you're failing at is so true to who you are, then you must employ the third option. Nothing stands in the way of desire. In other words, they say, you failed. But if this is something that's true to your essence, then you were tackling this with a lower part of yourself, and you really have to tackle this with a much deeper part of yourself. You must tackle this with your ratzon, with your innate desire. And when that happens, nothing could stand in its way. Blockages fall apart and melt away, as long as you're in touch with this deepest part of yourself. And that's why sometimes you might hear stories of a lady who saw a car run over a baby, and this lady picked up the car. And then they say, hold on, can this lady pick up so much weight? No, it's impossible. The lady cannot pick up so much weight. But when you are able to bring your soul forward, your soul can crash the matrix. It can crash the whole system. Your system has rules. and how it governs and how it operates. It says, oh, your capacity is you can lift 150 pounds. But when your life is on the line, all of a sudden, you could do miracles. But can you do miracles every day? Can this lady now, can she when she picked up the car, and they say, oh, so clearly you could lift up 2 tons. So now let me bring you to the gym to pick up 2 tons. But she tries and she's collapsing. Hold on. So can you or can't you? Well, it depends. If you're using your lower self, which is your conscious mind and emotions, then there's a system here, and you have to follow the rules of the system. But whenever we bring in a higher force, then we can go through amazing difficulties. We can overcome amazing challenges. The secret is if we can bring this to the front in most of our lives. So we're running out of time. So let me go through this exercise. Okay, actually, let me conclude the class, and then whoever wants to stay will stay for the exercise because I think the main points we brought here we already made. And then if someone wants to do the exercise with me, we can do that after the class. So, yeah. From the river to the sea, a Jewish person. You know, the joke that's going around. Be careful to say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, because Jews love anything that's free, and it might take 2. And that's it. Okay. Okay. So let's go through
Lesson 3. The Infinite Light. 1. In many prayers, we acknowledge God as the Creator and develop a sense of closeness with Him. At the same time, our daily prayers include passages that emphasize God's transcendence, for this aspect of God similarly deserves our attention. 2. Couples can set aside their differences by learning from their souls who were able to become soulmates by sensing God's infinity. Couples can then embrace their personalities and experiences and nevertheless find harmony. 3. Success requires strong desire. Therefore, we are advised to study those areas of Torah in which we already possess an interest. 4. We can generate desire by utilizing our power of dat, connection, to contemplate the importance of a given behavior or quality in a personalized way. 5. Our souls possess an innate desire to cleave to God. If this desire is concealed, we can awaken it by generating a calculated desire for God.
Okay. So the last 3 points is actually we're going to develop in the exercise. But thank you all for joining. Whoever has to leave now, we appreciate. I hope you enjoy a day of Thanksgiving, which is an important mitzvah to thank Hashem for our many gifts. And we should all use this moment to think about all the gratitude that we can have. It's just truly awesome how many things we have to be grateful for. And if only we'll pay attention to them, we'll be a happier, better people. So thank you all for coming. And with that, I wish you good night. And everyone who wishes to stay, we're going to spend the next 10, 15 minutes on explaining the dots, the power of dots. Okay.
Oh, that's sorry. Sorry for the loss.
Okay. For those that are staying for this exercise. Okay, so let's take a look at the 3 higher sefirot. I think they're in black on the map in the human chart. So we have here Chachma. That's our gift of comprehension. In our mind, we have 2 tools that we use. We have the creative mind and the analytical mind. The creative mind we call Chachma, which is comprised of 2 words, koach ma, the potential for what? It's the curious side to ourselves. It's always saying, what's beyond us? What is bigger than us? What is out there? So always the creative mind is always seeking for transcendence. It's a curious mind. It's a very curious mind. It's the spark of intellectual creativity. Sometimes you're working through a puzzle and you're trying to find the solution. And suddenly it comes to you. It's shown like a light bulb because it's getting a glimpse of the transcendence, something beyond, the infinite. And then it's trying to, okay, now a friend says, oh, you have the solution? What is the solution? Then you stumble. You're trying to translate to them and you're having a hard time. And that is because you have to use the other side of your mind called Bina. Bina, it means the comprehension, the analytical mind. The analytical mind is the power within the earth bringing seed to fruition. Okay, let's not use the metaphor, but it's the analytical mind processes things that are already there. So the curious mind looks for something beyond, and the analytical mind, Bina, takes what already is and tries to develop it, and tries to expound on it, and tries to process it. Which of these two minds are more important? The answer is that you can't have one without the other. If you have the creative mind, but it cannot process and analyze it, then it's like light. It's like a flash of light without a candle. You have a light, but you don't have the wick. You don't have the wax. You have nothing. It won't burn. It'll burn and it'll evaporate into existence. You need the wick and the wax to anchor that flash of creativity. The flash of creativity now has to be analyzed. Let's say the insight is to make a good product, it has to be simple. Let's say that's the insight you have. A good product has to be simple. You say, okay, so is a rock the best product? Oh, no. A rock has no function. It's too simple. You say, okay, so then maybe complex is the right answer. No. If it's too complex, it's too hard to use. See, in this process, we're already using the analytical mind. We're trying to find the definition. When we say we want a simple product to sell to customers, what kind of simple is the right kind of simple? If it's too simple, it could be too basic and not provide any functions to the customers, not be useful to the customers. However, if it's too complicated, it could also become the opposite of useful because it could require too many resources to use. It could be too complicated to learn. Okay, so now the Bina is developing the insight to find the limits and where are the limits. And this is expressed, the Chachma is on the right side. The right side is the male side. The right side of the chart is the male side, and the left side of the chart is the female side. Now, females again have all 10 sefirot, and males have all 10 sefirot. But which side do they dominate? The men are very good at insights, seeing the big picture, but sometimes they're so in the clouds, they're so out of touch with reality. And it takes the ladies to actually express it and to hone in on it. And that's why sometimes you ask your teenage son, how was your day? You'll hear a one-word answer, a grunt, so this, so that. And you ask your teenage daughter, and it's a 2-hour Megillah. What's the difference? It's because men are generally more from the Chachma side, from the creative mind, and women are more from the analytical mind. Of course, they both have both. And this is symbolized by reproduction. The man gives a little seed, and the woman develops it over 9 months. And so who's more important here? You kind of need both. You need both. And actually in Kabbalah, Chachma is called the father, and Bina is called the mother. And the emotions are called the children. Because when you have healthy Chachma and Bina, when you have a healthy creative mind and a healthy analytical mind, automatically that nourishes and develops emotions. But there's one key ingredient that you have. The same way between the sefirot, between man and woman, you need a higher divine force to bring them together. That also happens in the analytical mind, in the two sides of the minds. Because really, in a way, the two sides of the mind, they're different. They're so different that in a way, you analyze something too much, you could squash out the life. You could squash out the creative force. The creative force is not analyzed. The analytical, each side sees their side as the most important, right? One says, I'm most creative. They say, you're nothing. You're a flash of light. You're gone in a second. It's the analytical mind that's most important. And so there's this struggle between them. And so they could end up getting lost. And so what we need here for these powers to work together and to lead to healthy offspring is the third power called dat. Dat is the process where we think about relevance. Whenever we're studying a subject, if we don't think about its relevance to me, this information gets lost. The information doesn't last. It's as we illustrated last week. There was once, or 2 weeks ago, there was once a doctor who, the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, went into a doctor appointment. The doctor offered him. The doctor was telling him, this was in the 30s, the 1930s. The doctor was telling him, new information has come out and told us that smoking is bad for you. And then at the end of the appointment, the doctor offered a cigarette to the Rebbe. And Rabbi Schneerson, Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson said, I don't smoke. It's like, what do you mean? I know your health history. Of course you smoke. It's like, I used to, but now I don't anymore. What changed? The doctor knows all the information, but he never personalized the information. What does this information mean to me? Since he never personalized the information, it had no effect on him. So you have information, but it doesn't change you unless you take this third step called das. What this das does is this is the middle column. This is the middle column that brings in this higher power. It's this higher power of what does this mean to me? And whenever we employ that higher power, it helps us internalize and bring strong feelings. And so we can manufacture desires whenever we have information that we internalize. That could manufacture, and we're not trying to degrade. A manufactured desire could really mean getting in touch with an innate desire that you're not conscious of. So you're manufacturing, you're drawing down your desire that's you're disconnected from by doing the tool of das, of what does this mean to me? There was once a rabbi, a simple man who didn't know how to read or write. So he always used to bring his mail to the teacher. There was a teacher in the school. And so the teacher is reading the letter, and then he reads it to the farmer. What's this letter say? The letter says that your loved one has passed away. Who understands the contents of the letter better? The teacher. The teacher has the vocabulary. But who is this information relevant for? The farmer. So now the farmer touches him to the soul. So whenever we have information, but we don't take the time to personalize it and to say, what does this mean for me? Then it's empty. So if we pray, and we're praying in the Hebrew or the English, but the English is not a language that talks to us, then we're doing chachma and bina stuff. We're doing intellectual exercises, but it's worth nothing. It's not going to generate any love in our hearts, even though we know innately my soul loves God. So why don't I feel the love for God? I'm praying. So why don't I feel moved by these prayers? Because we're missing that key third ingredient, which is das, which is to personalize this information, to find a language. How do I make this language personal to me? And then that has the ability to draw up that well. In Torah, Do you know what the word is for intimacy in the Torah? It's this word, das. And Adam knew Eve, and they had children. What do you mean knew Eve? They knew they shared information about each other? No, intimacy. Intimacy is this when we take something that's outside of us, but we personalize it. We make, I care about you and everything about you and what you mean to me. Whenever we take somebody else and we personalize them to us, that is the act of das, of connection. Okay, so das means intimacy, and whenever we take concepts and we make it intimate to us, that has the potential to arouse our innate desires, to awaken our innate desires. Now, if you ever wondered, why did Chabad choose such a terrible name for their brand? It's hard to pronounce. Nobody knows what it means, right? It's like cream cheese gets stuck in your throat. It's like Chabad, Habad. It really is the acronym for these three sefirot. Chachma, Bina, and Da'at, or Das, is Chabad. It's three faculties. And this was a core insight of Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, was this idea that you can get in touch with your innate soul through meditative and intellectual inquiry. When you use this three-phase process, you can develop a deep love and closeness and attachment to God and a deep awe of God. And so his work, the Tanya, is at the end of the book, it goes through different meditations that you can do and different abstract concepts that he gives you language to personalize it, that it can develop these deep emotions and feelings and attachments to God. So that's kind of where that name comes from. It's using study, but if you study without internalizing, then the study is half the job. You have the first two sefirot, but you didn't employ dat, so you're not bringing in the big light. You have to bring in that infinite light into your life. Okay? In the book, there's an exercise. Let's try to do it together. And I'm amazed that you guys are still here. Truly incredible, because I'm sure you're all had long days. Oh, everyone's off work. You could sleep in tomorrow. So perfect. Okay, so let's go to exercise 3.1 on page 102. And we're going to try to practice this. This is the real secret, if we could practice this. So consider a positive quality or behavior that is currently not part of your life. It should be a quality or behavior you are somewhat interested in gaining, but don't strongly desire. Okay? So let me take a moment to think for myself. A positive quality or behavior that is currently not part of my life. Should be a quality of behavior you're somewhat interested in gaining, but don't strongly desire. Okay.
Because it's how to develop passion, something that you may not have a strong desire.
Right, but you know it's good for you, but just don't desire it, right? It's important, but you're not passionate about it right now, right?
You lack of passion.
You lack the passion. Very good. Okay, so let's go through step one. What all these steps are doing is personalizing this information, because you have the abstract. Can anyone want to offer up so we could do this in public? Anyone want to offer up in public? Anyone feel safe sharing what they want to work on in public? Okay, so let me go ahead.
Yes. Being more assertive at work.
Being more assertive at work. Okay, being more assertive. Sometimes we feel that we want to be nice to everyone. We don't want to make things complicated and ruffle feathers, but we know it's important sometimes to be assertive and be clear what we need and what we expect. Okay, so number one, consider an occasion when you did not perform well or failed to achieve something important because you lacked this quality or behavior. So the first thing in this exercise is think of a moment of an actual case in our life that had I been more assertive, things would have worked out better. But because I wasn't assertive in this scenario, things collapsed. Things didn't work out.
Cash may have missed out.
Right. Now, step number 2. Right. Now we're using this example of being assertive, but everyone will use their own example. Now, step number 2. Consider an instance in which you or someone you know performed well or achieved something important due to having the quality or behavior. So think to a moment in your life when you were assertive, even though it was hard, but it led to good results, or there's somebody else you know that is assertive, and how it worked. Number 3, imagine how your life might be enhanced if you gain this quality or behavior. And you spend time to think about it and to actually visualize it in your mind. Number 4, imagine how the lives of your loved ones might be enhanced if you gain this quality or behavior. Right? Sometimes, let's say being assertive. Sometimes assertive is good for us, but sometimes it's even good for the people we're being assertive to. Being assertive actually is beneficial to them as well. Number 5, identify the most significant challenges to introducing this quality and behavior in your life. And number 6, can you offer a possible solution to mitigate one or some of these challenges? Most people have something they want to work on in life, but don't take the time to do this exercise. And therefore, the passion is never, the fuel to implement this change isn't there. But if we take a moment to go through this process is using Chachma and Bina. It's using our creative mind and our analytical mind. What is the challenge? That's using our analytical mind. What are possible solutions? That's using the creative mind, right? We're using our creative mind and our intellectual mind, but because we're personalizing it, it's guaranteed that if we go through this process, we will create within us the passion and the fuel that will allow us to achieve what we need to achieve. It's work. And that's why most people don't do it, because it's work. But if we do it, then we could gain new skills, new powers that we thought we don't have. I can't be this way. It's not who I am. But when you employ the innate part of your soul, then nothing's impossible. No blockages are in the way. Well, this is a way of manufacturing, of drawing in your innate soul, your infinite soul, is by doing this meditative work of das, of personalizing it, of creating an intimacy of this information, making this information close to our heart. And when we do that, when we meditate and we bring it close to our heart, then it sucks out our soul and brings it into life. And then now we have the fuel to actually get the job done. Okay. So I wish you all well to actually do this exercise, try to get it done, and try to make this change in your life. And you'll be better for it, and everyone around you will be better for it.
I actually do this.
You do this? Okay. And I will see you next week for the world of chaos.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.